Grandma, I need to tell you about Elena. You would have loved her fierce spirit, the way she carried herself even when the world seemed determined to break her down. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? You always told me stories should start where the heart first breaks. And Elena's heart shattered the morning she signed that contract. $5 million. That's what they offered her family to save her father's life. $5 million to marry a man she'd never met, a disabled CEO whose reputation preceded him like shadows before a storm. Elena Martinez sat in the sterile conference room, her hands trembling as she stared at the marriage contract, knowing that her signature would trade away any chance at the love you always said she deserved. Miss Martinez, the lawyer's voice cut through her thoughts like ice, your father's medical bills have exceeded $2 million. Without this arrangement, the creditors will... I know what they'll do. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper, but Grandma, you would have heard the steel beneath the silk. She was 24, brilliant, and had just watched her dreams of finishing her master's degree in literature crumble like autumn leaves. Her father's cancer had consumed not just his body, but their entire family's future. The door opened, and Elena's breath caught. She expected lawyers, maybe a representative, but instead a figure in a wheelchair rolled into the room. Even sitting, he commanded attention. Sharp jawline, dark hair that caught the fluorescent lights, and eyes that seemed to hold secrets deeper than ocean trenches. This was Adrian Kane, the man she was supposed to marry. But Grandma, here's where the story takes a turn that even you, with all your wisdom about the heart's mysterious ways, might not have seen coming. As Adrian's gaze met Elena's across that cold conference table, she felt a jolt of recognition that had nothing to do with newspaper photos or business magazines. Those eyes. She knew those eyes. 10 years ago, in a small coffee shop near Columbia University, a young man had helped her when she'd spilled coffee all over her textbooks. He'd bought her a new latte, helped dry her books, and they'd talked for hours about poetry, dreams, and the way sunlight looked different when you were happy. She'd fallen in love that afternoon, Grandma. Real love, the kind you used to describe when you'd tell me about Grandpa. His name had been Adrian then, too, but he'd been Adrian Torres, pre-med student with calloused hands from working construction to pay for school. Not Adrian Kane, brilliant CEO who'd survived a car accident that had left him paralyzed from the waist down and apparently erased all memory of a girl who'd given him her heart over coffee and poetry? Elena's pen hovered over the signature line, her world tilting on its axis. The man she was being forced to marry for money was the first and only man she'd ever truly loved. The man who disappeared from her life without a word, leaving her to wonder for 10 years if love was just a cruel joke the universe played on dreamers. But he didn't recognize her. She could see it in his polite, professional demeanor, in the way he discussed the terms of their arrangement like she was just another business contract to be managed. The boy who quoted Neruda to her under flickering cafe lights was gone, replaced by this untouchable stranger in an expensive suit. Grandma, you always said that sometimes God writes our stories in ways we don't understand until we're living them. As Elena signed her name, sealing her fate to a man who had once held her heart and now held her family's survival in his hands, she wondered if this was divine comedy or cosmic cruelty. She had no idea that the next 11 months would test every piece of wisdom you ever shared with me about love, sacrifice, and the courage to fight for what matters most. Grandma, let me paint you a picture of who Elena really was, because I think you'd recognize something of yourself in her. She'd grown up in a small apartment above her father's bookstore in Queens, surrounded by stories, but living a reality that often felt too harsh for fairy tales. Her mother had left when Elena was 12, not because she didn't love them, but because she loved her addiction more. Elena had watched her father, Carlos, rebuild their world one book at a time, teaching her that stories could heal wounds that nothing else could touch. "Mija," he used to tell me, "books are like people. The worn ones, the ones with broken spines and dog-eared pages, those are the ones that have been loved the most." Now, as cancer ravaged his body, Elena realized that maybe people were like books too. Her father's spine was breaking, but the love within him had only grown stronger. Elena had put her dreams on hold 3 times already. First, when her mother left and she'd helped run the bookstore through high school. Then again, when her father's first bout of cancer had forced her to work double shifts to keep them afloat. Now, as she prepared to move into Adrian Kane's penthouse as his wife, she was doing it again. But this time, she told herself, it would be the last time. Adrian Kane was a different story entirely. The business world knew him as the brilliant CEO who'd transformed Kane Industries from a struggling tech startup into a billion-dollar empire. What they didn't know, Grandma, was the boy he used to be. Elena remembered Adrian Torres, remembered how his eyes would light up when he talked about becoming a doctor, about opening free clinics in underserved communities. Remembered the scar on his left hand from a construction accident, the way he'd unconsciously trace it when he was thinking deeply. The accident that had changed everything happened 8 years ago. Adrian had been driving to meet with investors for a medical device company he'd founded, technology that could have revolutionized prosthetics for children. A drunk driver had run a red light, and in the seconds that it took for metal to crumple and dreams to shatter, Adrian Torres had died, and Adrian Kane had been born.
He'd awakened in the hospital not just paralyzed, but with gaps in his memory. The doctors called it selective amnesia, trauma-induced memory loss that had wiped away portions of his past. He remembered his childhood, his education, but the years of struggle, of love, of being the man who'd wanted to heal the world, those had vanished like morning mist. In the absence of those memories, he'd rebuilt himself as something harder, colder. If he couldn't heal people with medicine, he'd control the world through business. Kane Industries became his fortress, and his disability became both his shield and his weapon. People underestimated him, and he used that to his advantage. But Grandma, even fortress walls have cracks, and Elena would soon discover that behind Adrian's carefully constructed defenses, pieces of the man she'd once loved were still very much alive. The first morning Elena woke up in the penthouse, she found Adrian in what he called his sanctuary, a room filled with medical textbooks he claimed he read for investment purposes. But she noticed the way his fingers lingered on pages about spinal cord injuries, the research papers about experimental treatments scattered across his desk. The boy who'd wanted to heal the world was still there, buried under years of bitter success. Their arrangement was clinical. She would appear at business functions as his wife, help manage his public image, and in return, her father's medical bills would be covered. No personal involvement, no emotional complications, just a contract that would save one life and preserve another's reputation. If you've been listening closely, Grandma, you know that's not how love works. Love doesn't read contracts or respect boundaries. Love remembers, even when minds forget. And if anyone reading this has ever felt like they lost themselves along the way, like the person they used to be got buried under circumstances and pain, share your story in the comments below. Sometimes we need to remember that we're not the only ones fighting to find our way back to who we really are. 3 weeks into their marriage of convenience, everything changed on a Tuesday. Grandma, you always said that Tuesdays were tricky, not dramatic like Mondays or hopeful like Fridays, just quietly dangerous in their ordinariness. This particular Tuesday started with Elena making breakfast in the vast kitchen of Adrian's penthouse, trying to feel normal in a life that was anything but. She'd fallen into a routine. Adrian left early for the office. She spent her days reading in his extensive library or helping her father with physical therapy via video calls. They barely spoke beyond pleasantries. He was polite, professional, and completely unreachable. But that morning, as she scrambled eggs and hummed unconsciously, she heard something that made her freeze. Adrian was on a phone call in his study, door slightly ajar, his voice carrying that particular note of frustrated passion she remembered so well. "No, I won't shelve the prosthetics project," he was saying, his words sharp with emotion. "There are kids out there who could benefit from this technology. I don't care if the profit margins are narrow." Elena's heart began to race. This wasn't the cold businessman she had married. This was the echo of someone she'd once known, someone who dreamed of healing the world. She crept closer, and through the crack in the door she saw Adrian hunched over his desk, surrounded by medical journals and photographs of children with limb differences. His hands were pressed against his temples, and for a moment he looked exactly like the young man who'd sat across from her in that coffee shop, wrestling with organic chemistry problems and his determination to make a difference. "Sir," she heard his assistant's voice through the speakerphone, "the board is concerned about the R&D costs." "The board can go to hell," Adrian snapped, then immediately softened his tone. "Sorry, Janet, I'd just look into grants, medical foundations, anything. These kids deserve better than what's currently available." Elena's breath caught. The Adrian Torres she had fallen in love with was still in there, fighting to get out. But then disaster struck in the way that disasters do, suddenly, completely, and with perfect timing to destroy everything fragile and new. Elena's phone rang, the call she'd been dreading for months. Her father's doctor, voice heavy with the weight of terrible news. "Miss Martinez, I'm afraid your father's condition has taken a turn. We need to discuss preparations." The phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the marble floor. The sound echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. And suddenly Adrian was there, his wheelchair moving swiftly from his study. "Elena, what's wrong?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The one thing this marriage was supposed to prevent, losing her father, was happening anyway. The $5 million, the sacrifice of her dreams, the ache of living with a man who didn't remember loving her, all of it had been for nothing. "I need to go," she whispered, already moving toward her coat. "My father, he's—" "Wait." Adrian's voice had changed, carrying an authority she wasn't used to from him. "Whatever's happening, we'll handle it together." "Together?" The word came out sharper than she had intended. "Adrian, we're not really married. This is just a business arrangement, remember?" Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or confusion. But then his mask slipped back into place. "Of course, but your father's health is part of our agreement. I'll call my medical team." "Your medical team has been treating him for months." Elena's composure finally cracked. 10 years of buried pain and 3 weeks of pretense erupting all at once. "Don't you understand? Some things can't be fixed with money or connections or medical teams. Sometimes people just leave." She was crying now, and Grandma, you would have recognized the sound. Not just grief for her father, but the deeper ache of a heart that had been broken too many times to trust in anything permanent. Adrian sat frozen, watching her fall apart, and for a moment Elena thought she saw something shift in his expression. A softness, a recognition. But then he was moving, his wheelchair positioned between her and the door. "Elena, stop. Just stop running for 1 minute." "Running?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm not running. I'm trying to be with my father when he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Then we'll go together," Adrian said simply. "Not because it's part of our contract, but because—" He paused, struggling with words.
Because nobody should face that alone. And there it was, Grandma, the crack in the fortress wall that would change everything. In that moment of raw honesty, the boy Elena had once loved flickered to life in the man she'd married for money. She didn't know it yet, but Adrian's offer to accompany her to the hospital would be the first step in a journey that would unravel everything they thought they knew about love, memory, and the heart's ability to find its way home. The drive to Queens took 45 minutes through Tuesday afternoon traffic, but it felt like crossing into another universe. Adrian's luxury car pulled up outside the modest apartment building where Elena had grown up, and she watched him take in the fire escapes, the corner bodega, the children playing in the small courtyard. This wasn't his world of marble lobbies and doormen, and she found herself holding her breath, waiting for his judgment. But when Adrian looked at her, his expression was gentle. "This is where you grew up?" "Above the bookstore," Elena said, pointing to the empty storefront below. "Dad had to close it when he got sick the first time. The rent for a business and medical bills." She shrugged, the gesture carrying years of accumulated losses. Adrian nodded, and something in his face suggested he understood more about loss than his penthouse lifestyle revealed. "The bookstore that made you fall in love with literature." Elena started. In all their careful, polite conversations, she'd never mentioned her passion for books. "How did you have a particular way of touching books, like they're alive. I noticed." Grandma, that was the first moment Elena realized Adrian saw her, really saw her, in ways she hadn't expected. But there was no time to explore that revelation, because they'd arrived at the hospital, and her father was waiting. Carlos Martinez looked smaller than Elena remembered, the cancer having carved away everything except his essence. But his eyes still held that gentle wisdom that had raised her, that had taught her to find strength in stories when reality became too heavy to bear. "Mija," he whispered as Elena took his hand. "You came." "Of course I came, Papa." Carlos's gaze shifted to Adrian, and Elena tensed. Her father had never met her husband, and this wasn't how she'd imagined introducing them. But Carlos smiled, the expression transforming his gaunt features. "So you're the young man who married my daughter?" Adrian moved his wheelchair closer to the bed. "Yes, sir, I'm Adrian." "Are you taking good care of my Elena?" The question hung in the air, like incense in a church, heavy with meaning that went beyond their business arrangement. Adrian's eyes found Elena's, and for a moment the room felt too small to contain the weight of unspoken truths. "I'm trying to learn how to," Adrian said finally, and Elena's heart squeezed at the honesty in his voice. They spent the afternoon in that hospital room, and Grandma, something magical happened. Carlos, despite his weakness, began telling stories about Elena as a child, about the bookstore, about the neighborhood. And Adrian listened with an intensity that reminded Elena painfully of the young man she'd once known. "Elena used to reorganize my entire store," Carlos chuckled weakly. "Not by author or subject, but by emotion. She'd put all the sad books together so they could comfort each other." Adrian glanced at Elena. "That's actually brilliant. Emotional cataloging." "She wrote poems too," Carlos continued, his voice growing softer. "Beautiful poems about coffee shops and strangers who might become everything." Elena's breath caught. She had written exactly one poem about a coffee shop encounter, and she'd shared it with her father years ago. But the way Adrian's hands stilled on his wheelchair arms, the way his breathing changed, it was as if something deep inside him had recognized a frequency only he could hear.
"Coffee shops?" Adrian repeated, his voice strange. "See, about this young man she met in college. She was in love with him, that one. Used to quote the things he'd say, dream about the life they'd build together." Carlos's eyes were closing, but he smiled. She kept waiting for him to come back. "Papa," Elena whispered, tears threatening. This wasn't the conversation she'd wanted to have in front of Adrian, but her father was fading, and she realized he was trying to tell her something important before it was too late. "Mija, listen to me." Carlos's grip on her hand strengthened with surprising force. "Sometimes love finds a way, even when we think it's lost. Sometimes people come back to us in ways we don't expect." Adrian had gone very still. In the fluorescent hospital lighting, Elena could see a fine tremor in his hands, the way his jaw clenched as if he were fighting against something trying to surface. "I should check on some calls," Adrian said abruptly, rolling his wheelchair toward the door. "Give you time with your father." But as he reached the threshold, Carlos called out to him. "Adrian?" "Yes, sir?" "Take care of her heart." Carlos's voice carried the weight of a father's final blessing. "She's only given it away once before, and when she loves with everything." Adrian's knuckles were white on his wheelchair rims. "I understand, sir." After he left, Elena sat with her father's words echoing in her mind. For 10 years, she'd wondered what had happened to Adrian Torres, why he'd disappeared, why he'd never called, why he'd left her believing that their connection had meant nothing to him. Now, sitting in a hospital room with her dying father and her distant husband, she began to wonder if the truth was more complicated than abandonment. But before she could process that thought fully, Adrian returned, and the look on his face made her blood run cold. "Elena, we need to talk. Outside. Now." Something in his tone, urgency mixed with fear, made her kiss her father's forehead and follow Adrian into the hallway. "What's wrong?" Adrian's face was pale, his usual composure shattered. "I just got a call from Janet. Someone's been digging into our marriage, asking questions about the financial arrangement." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that could destroy everything. If this gets out, that our marriage is a business contract, it won't just ruin my reputation. It could invalidate the arrangement entirely. The money for your father's treatment, the hospital bills we've covered." Adrian's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Elena, they could demand it all back, with interest." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Elena's feet. "But that's millions of dollars! We don't have millions of dollars!" "I know." Then what do we do?" Adrian's eyes met hers, and she saw a determination there that reminded her powerfully of the young man who'd once told her he'd change the world. "We make this marriage real," he said quietly, "in every way that matters. Grandma, if you're listening and you've ever felt like life was asking you to risk everything on faith, to bet your heart when the odds were stacked against you, share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the scariest decisions are the ones that save us." That night, back in the penthouse, Elena stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room, watching the city lights blur into watercolor streaks through her tears. Her father was dying, her marriage was being investigated, and the man she'd once loved didn't even remember her name. The weight of it all pressed against her chest like a physical force. Behind her, she heard the familiar sound of Adrian's wheelchair approaching. He'd been making calls all evening, trying to manage the crisis, but his presence felt different now, more close, more immediate, as if their conversation at the hospital had shifted something fundamental between them. "Elena!" She didn't turn around. "Don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't." "You don't know what I'm going to say."
Yes, I do. She pressed her palm against the cool glass. You're going to tell me we need to convince everyone our marriage is real, that we need to share a bedroom, hold hands in public events, and maybe even— She couldn't finish the sentence. The idea of pretending intimacy with Adrian felt like the cruelest kind of torture, so close to what she'd once dreamed of, but completely hollow.
That's not what I was going to say. Something in his voice made her turn around. Adrian sat silhouetted against the lamplight, his face half in shadow, and for a moment he looked exactly like the boy she'd fallen in love with in that coffee shop. Uncertain, vulnerable, real. Then what? He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on his wheelchair arms, the same gesture she remembered him making when he was thinking deeply. "I've been having dreams," he said finally. Yelena's heart stopped. Dreams? About a coffee shop, a girl with dark hair who laughed at terrible jokes and quoted poetry like it was scripture. Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. "In the dreams, I'm walking, and I'm happy in a way I can't remember being in real life." The room felt charged with electricity. Yelena gripped the window frame to steady herself. "Adrian!" "I know, it sounds crazy. The doctor said the memory loss was permanent, that trying to force things would only cause more trauma. But being around you, listening to your father talk about coffee shops and poetry—" He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the city lights like dark water. "Elena, I think I've been dreaming about you." The words hung between them like a bridge that could either connect their hearts or collapse under the weight of 10 years of pain. Yelena wanted to run to him, to tell him everything, about the afternoon in the café, about the promises they'd made, about the years she'd spent waiting for him to remember her, but fear held her frozen. "Dreams don't mean anything," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Don't they? Then why do I know that you take your coffee with exactly 2 sugars and a splash of cream? Why do I know that you hum when you're nervous, and that you have a scar on your left ankle from falling off your bike when you were 7? Each observation hit Yelena like a physical blow. He did remember. Some part of him had always remembered. "Why do I know," Adrian continued, his voice growing stronger, "that when you smile, really smile, not the polite version you give strangers, you get a dimple just here?" He reached up as if to touch the left corner of Yelena's mouth, stopping just short of contact. Yelena was crying now, 10 years of grief and hope and love spilling down her cheeks. "Because you knew me before." "Before what?" "Before the accident, before you became Adrian Kane, before you forgot." She sank to her knees beside his wheelchair, bringing them to eye level. "Your name was Adrian Torres. You were pre-med at Columbia. We met in a coffee shop near campus, and I fell in love with you over terrible poetry and cold lattes." Adrian's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like recognition dawning. "Torres," he repeated. "I remember construction work, paying for school. You had a scar on your hand from a table saw accident." Adrian slowly turned his left hand palm up, revealing the thin white line Yelena had memorized years ago. "The doctor said this was from the car accident." "No, you got it the week before we met. You were worried it would affect your surgical skills someday." "Surgery." The word came out like a prayer. "I wanted to be a surgeon. You wanted to change the world, open free clinics, make prosthetics that every child could afford." Yelena's voice broke. "You disappeared right before finals. I never knew why. I thought maybe I'd imagined how you felt about me." Adrian stared at his hands, his breathing shallow. "The doctors said I was found in my car with no identification, that I'd apparently changed my name from Torres to Kane before the accident, maybe to distance myself from some kind of trouble."
What kind of trouble? I never investigated. I figured the past was the past. He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Elena, if what you're saying is true, then I didn't choose to forget you. I didn't choose to disappear. The relief that flooded through Elena was almost overwhelming. For 10 years, she'd carried the weight of thinking she wasn't worth remembering, wasn't worth fighting for. To learn that Adrian hadn't chosen to forget her changed everything. But why Kane? Why change your name? Adrian was quiet for a moment, then wheeled over to his desk. He pulled out a file Yelena had never seen before. I had Janet do some research after I started having the dreams. Adrian Torres was supposed to report for an interview with a medical device company on the day of the accident, a company that was later investigated for fraud, bribing officials, cutting corners on safety testing. Yelena's breath caught. You think someone was after you?
I think someone wanted to make sure Adrian Torres never made it to that interview, that he never exposed what he discovered. Adrian's jaw tightened. Changing my name to Kane probably saved my life, but it cost me you. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of conspiracy and loss that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. But underneath the trauma and confusion, something else was emerging, the undeniable truth that they'd found each other again. Adrian, Elena said softly, what do we do now? He looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried an echo of the young man she'd once known. Now we remember, together, and we make sure nobody can ever separate us again. As if drawn by invisible threads, Elena moved closer to Adrian's chair. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining with the remembered familiarity of 1,000 coffee shop afternoons. The boy she'd loved and the man she'd married were the same person, just fractured by circumstance and trauma. But first, Adrian said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, we save your father, and we make this marriage everything it should have been from the beginning. Grandma, you always said that love was the strongest force in the universe, capable of bridging any gap, healing any wound. As Elena leaned forward and kissed the man she'd never stopped loving, she finally understood what you meant. 2 days later, Elena's world collapsed entirely. She was sitting beside her father's hospital bed, reading aloud from his favorite Garcia Marquez novel, when the monitors began their urgent, mechanical screaming. Carlos had been holding her hand, his grip weak but warm, and suddenly his fingers went limp. Papa, no, please! The medical team flooded in, pushing Elena aside as they worked. She stood pressed against the wall, watching them fight for her father's life, feeling utterly powerless. This was what she'd been trying to prevent for months, this moment when everything she loved would be ripped away. Adrian arrived as they were wheeling Carlos into emergency surgery. Elena looked up to find him in the doorway, his face reflecting her own terror back to her. How bad? She asked simply. They don't know. His heart, the cancer spread. Elena couldn't form complete sentences. The words felt like glass in her throat. Adrian moved his wheelchair beside the plastic hospital chair where she had collapsed. He's strong, Elena. He's going to fight. But even as he said it, both of them knew they were facing the possibility that Elena might lose the last family she had left. The $5 million, their rediscovered love, the promises they'd made, none of it mattered if Carlos Martinez didn't survive the night. 3 hours passed in the surgical waiting room. Elena paced the small space like a caged animal, while Adrian made quiet phone calls, ensuring that Carlos would have the best possible care regardless of cost.
But money couldn't fix a heart that was simply worn out from fighting too many battles. When Dr. Patel finally emerged from surgery, his expression told them everything before he spoke. "We did everything we could," he said gently. "Mr. Martinez is stable for now, but the cancer has spread to his heart muscle. We're looking at days, maybe a week." Elena's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Adrian hadn't caught her, pulling her onto his lap as she sobbed against his shoulder. All the careful control she'd maintained for months crumbled in that moment. "I failed him," she whispered. "This whole marriage, everything we've been through, it was supposed to save him." "Elena, no. You gave him time. You gave him hope. You showed him that his daughter was going to be okay." But Elena couldn't be consoled. The grief was too raw, too absolute. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, but preparation meant nothing in the face of actually losing the man who'd raised her, who taught her that love was worth any sacrifice. They stayed at the hospital that night, taking shifts sitting with Carlos while he drifted in and out of consciousness. During Elena's watch, around 3 a.m., her father opened his eyes and smiled weakly at her. "Mija, you look tired." "Papa, don't worry about me." "But that's what fathers do." "Elena, I need to tell you something about your husband." "Papa, save your strength." "Listen, that young man loves you, really loves you. I can see it in the way he looks at you, the way he's taking care of you now." Elena's tears started fresh. "It's complicated, Papa."
Love always is. But Elena, I'm not going to be here to remind you anymore, so listen carefully. Carlos paused, gathering strength. Don't let fear make you waste the love you found. Don't spend years wondering what if, like I did with your mother. What do you mean? I loved your mother before she got sick, before the addiction. I spent so many years angry at her for leaving, I forgot to be grateful for the time we had. Carlos's eyes were growing heavy. Promise me, mija. Promise me you won't waste the love you have now. Papa, I promise. Good. Now, there's something else. In my apartment, in the old coffee tin above the stove, there's a letter for you. Read it after. He couldn't finish, but Elena understood. The next morning brought more devastating news. Janet, Adrian's assistant, called with an update on their investigation into their marriage. Someone had leaked details of their financial arrangement to a business reporter. The story would run in tomorrow's paper, exposing their marriage as a sham and potentially making Elena responsible for millions in fraudulent claims. We have maybe 12 hours, Adrian told Elena, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria, both too exhausted to eat the sandwiches he'd bought. 12 hours before this becomes public and everything falls apart. Maybe it's for the best, Elena said dully. The fight had gone out of her. Her father was dying, and now she was going to lose Adrian all over again, probably end up in legal trouble, and spend the rest of her life paying back money she'd never had. Elena, look at me. Adrian's voice carried a note of command that cut through her despair. Remember what your father said. Don't waste the love we have. But we don't have anything anymore. After tomorrow, you'll be a scandal, I'll be a fraud, and... She gestured helplessly. Even if we love each other, love doesn't pay legal bills or fix damaged reputations. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched coffee. When he looked up, his expression had changed completely. Gone was the uncertainty, the careful distance he'd maintained for weeks. In its place was something fierce and determined. "You're right. Love doesn't fix everything, but love makes you fight harder than you thought possible." "Elena, no, let me finish." He leaned forward, his hands finding hers across the small table. "I lost you once because of circumstances beyond our control. I'm not losing you again, especially not to something as pathetic as a business scandal." "What do you mean?" "I'm saying that if the world wants to see our marriage as real, then let's make it so real that nobody can question it. Let's make it so obviously, undeniably genuine that the financial arrangement becomes irrelevant." Elena felt a flicker of hope, dangerous and fragile. "How?" Adrian's smile was the same one that had made her fall in love with him over coffee and poetry 10 years ago. "Trust me, and be ready for the fight of our lives." But before Elena could ask what he meant, her phone rang. The call she'd been expecting and dreading. Her father's doctor, with news that would change everything one last time. "Miss Martinez, you need to come quickly. Your father is asking for you." As they rushed back to Carlos's room, Elena realized that sometimes the darkest hour comes just before you have to choose who you're going to be for the rest of your life. In a few minutes, she would say goodbye to her father. Tomorrow, she would face a scandal that could destroy everything. But for the first time in months, she wasn't facing it alone. Adrian Torres, the man she'd always loved, was fighting beside her. Carlos Martinez died at sunrise on a Thursday, surrounded by the two people who loved him most. His final words, spoken to Adrian, were, "Take care of my girl. She's stronger than she knows." Elena felt something break inside her chest, but it wasn't just grief. It was the sound of every careful wall she'd built around her heart finally crumbling. As she kissed her father's forehead goodbye, she whispered the promise she'd made him. She wouldn't waste the love she'd found. 2 hours later, standing in her father's empty apartment, Elena opened the coffee tin above the stove with trembling hands. Inside was a single letter written in her father's careful script. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then my time has come, and you're probably feeling lost. But I need you to know something that I should have told you years ago. When your mother left us, I blamed love. I thought love had betrayed me, made me weak, left me broken. I spent years being angry at her for leaving. I forgot to be grateful for the time we had. Don't make the same mistake. The young man you married, I knew who he was the moment I saw him. Not Adrian Kane, the businessman, but Adrian Torres, the boy you used to talk about, the one who quoted poetry and dreamed of healing the world. I recognized him because love leaves marks on people, mija. It changes how they move through the world, how they look at what matters. He doesn't remember you yet, but his heart does. I saw it in how he listened when you talked, how he positioned his wheelchair to catch the light on your face, how he said your name like it was prayer. A man doesn't look at a stranger that way. You have a choice now. You can let fear make you small, make you settle for safety over happiness, or you can be brave enough to claim the love that found its way back to you against impossible odds. Choose love, Elena. Choose it fiercely, completely, without reservation.
Choose it the way I should have chosen it with your mother before the sickness took her away from us. Choose love, and teach that boy to choose it too. All my love always, Papa.
Elena sank to the kitchen floor, her father's words washing over her like absolution. Through the window she could see Adrian in his car, giving her privacy to grieve, but close enough that she wasn't alone. Even in death, her father was still taking care of her, still showing her the way forward. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. The story goes live in 4 hours. Are you ready? Elena looked around the small apartment where she'd grown up, where she'd learned that stories could save you if you were brave enough to write your own ending. Then she typed back, "I'm ready. Let's show them what real love looks like." But when they arrived back at the penthouse, they found Janet waiting with news that changed everything. "Mr. Kane," she said, her face pale with stress, "the reporter isn't just running the story about your marriage arrangement. They have more." "More what?" Adrian demanded. "Documents, financial records showing that you've been secretly funding the prosthetics research for children with limb differences. Records of the medical grants you've provided anonymously. The reporter is suggesting that you manipulated your own marriage to create a cover story for massive tax fraud." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "But that's not true. The medical research, the grants, those are separate from our arrangement." "We know that. But the way the documents are presented, it looks like you created a fake marriage to justify moving money around for personal projects." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his hands steepled in front of him. When he looked up, his expression was resolved. "Schedule a press conference for this afternoon," he said quietly. "Adrian, no." Elena moved to his side. "If you expose the marriage arrangement publicly, I'll be liable for millions in fraud. I'll go to prison." "Not if we do this right." Adrian reached for her hand, his grip steady and sure. "Elena, do you trust me?" She looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had quoted Neruda to her over coffee, the same eyes that had watched her father die with tears running down his cheeks, the same eyes that looked at her now like she was worth fighting the entire world for. "I trust you," she said. "Then we're going to tell the truth, all of it." The press conference was held in the main conference room of Kane Industries. Elena had never seen so many reporters and cameras in one place, all of them hungry for the scandal that would destroy Adrian's reputation and her freedom. But as they took their seats at the front of the room, Elena felt strangely calm. Her father was gone, but his words echoed in her heart. Choose love. Adrian had insisted she wear her favorite blue dress, the same color as the sweater she'd worn the day they met in the coffee shop. His own dark suit was impeccable, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set with determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian began, his voice carrying easily through the room, "I've called this press conference to address the allegations that will appear in tomorrow's business section regarding my marriage to Elena Martinez." A murmur ran through the crowd of reporters. Elena felt their eyes on her like physical weight, but Adrian's presence beside her was steady as bedrock. "It's true that our marriage began as a financial arrangement. Elena's father was dying of cancer. He needed treatment that would cost millions. I needed a wife for public relations purposes. We entered into a contract." The room erupted in shouted questions, but Adrian raised his hand for silence. "However," he said, his voice growing stronger, "what the documents and allegations don't show is the full truth. Elena Martinez didn't marry a stranger for money. She married the man she fell in love with 10 years ago, before I became Adrian Kane, when I was still Adrian Torres, a pre-med student who met a beautiful girl in a coffee shop and promised we'd change the world together." Elena's breath caught. He was telling their story, their real story, to the world. "The accident that left me paralyzed also caused memory loss. I forgot the most important years of my life. I forgot the woman I had loved, the promises we'd made, the dreams we'd shared. When Elena agreed to marry me, she was trying to save her father, but she was also trying to save the man she'd never stopped loving, even when that man didn't remember her name." The reporters were scribbling frantically, cameras flashing like lightning, but Adrian only had eyes for Elena. "Elena, I know this isn't how we planned it, but..." Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. 10 years ago, in a coffee shop near Columbia, I fell in love with a girl who laughed at terrible jokes and quoted poetry like scripture. I've been trying to find my way back to that moment ever since. Elena's hands flew to her mouth as Adrian opened the box, revealing a simple, perfect diamond ring. "This isn't for the cameras, or the contracts, or the business arrangements," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "This is Adrian Torres asking Elena Martinez if she'll marry him again, this time for real, this time for love, for the life we were meant to build together." The room was utterly silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 100 cameras capturing this moment, but all she could see was the boy she'd fallen in love with, finally, fully, completely himself again. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Adrian, yes, always yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena realized that sometimes the most public moments can also be the most private. The reporters, the cameras, the scandal, all of it faded away, leaving just two people who'd fought their way back to each other against impossible odds. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian said, never taking his eyes off Elena, "I'd like to introduce you to my wife. Really, my wife this time. Grandma, if you're listening, and if there's anyone out there who's ever had to choose between playing it safe and fighting for love, I hope you'll share your story too. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when the whole world is watching."
The aftermath of the press conference was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that changes everything for the better. Within hours, the story had transformed from a scandal about financial fraud to a love story that captured hearts around the world. The hashtag Coffee Shop Love was trending, and Kane Industries' stock price was actually rising as investors responded to Adrian's honesty and the emotional authenticity of their story. But more importantly, Elena felt free for the first time in years. The secrets were gone. The pretending was over. She was married to the man she loved for all the right reasons, and the whole world knew it. They spent that evening in Adrian's study. Their study now, she supposed, dealing with the practical aftermath. Lawyers called to confirm that the public acknowledgement of their genuine feelings would actually protect them from fraud charges. The financial arrangement was real, but so had the love that had grown from it. Intent mattered in legal proceedings, and their intent was now undeniably clear. "Elena," Adrian said, as they finally finished the last call, "there's something else we need to discuss." She looked up from the legal documents she'd been reviewing. Adrian had been quieter than usual since the press conference, and she'd been wondering when whatever was troubling him would surface. "The name change, from Torres to Kane. I remember more now about why I did it." Elena set down the papers and gave him her full attention. "Tell me." "The medical device company I was supposed to interview with, they weren't just cutting corners on safety. They were deliberately designing prosthetics to fail after a certain period, forcing families to buy replacements they couldn't afford. I had evidence, documents that showed they were prioritizing profit over the lives of children who needed their products." Elena's breath caught. "You were going to expose them?" "Yes, but someone found out. The day before my interview, I got a call threatening not just me, but anyone I cared about." Adrian's hands clenched on his wheelchair arms. "I changed my name to Kane and was planning to disappear after the interview to keep you safe. The accident happened before I could call you, before I could explain." The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Adrian hadn't abandoned her. He'd been trying to protect her. The guilt she'd carried for 10 years, the assumption that she hadn't mattered enough to fight for, dissolved like sugar and rain. "The company," Elena said softly, "what happened to them?" "They went bankrupt 3 years ago. Turns out other people had evidence too, and without my testimony, it just took longer to bring them down." Adrian's voice was bitter. "All that sacrifice,
All those years of forgetting, and justice happened anyway. Elena moved from her chair to perch on the arm of Adrian's wheelchair, her hand finding his shoulder. But if you hadn't forgotten, if the accident hadn't happened, you might never have become Adrian Kane. You might never have had the resources to fund the prosthetics research yourself. Adrian looked up at her, surprise flickering across his features. I hadn't thought of it that way. Maybe, Elena said, her voice growing stronger with conviction, maybe everything happened exactly the way it needed to. Maybe losing each other was the only way we could find each other again with the power to actually change the world. As if summoned by her words, Adrian's phone rang. Janet's voice came through the speaker, breathless with excitement. Mr. Kane, I know it's late, but I have news about the prosthetics project. After the press conference today, we've had 17 major medical institutions call wanting to partner with us. And the Rodriguez Foundation, they want to fund the entire pediatric program. We're looking at enough money to provide free prosthetics for every child who needs them, not just in the US, but globally. Adrian watched Elena's face transform as the magnitude of Janet's words hit him. The dream he'd carried as a young pre-med student, the vision that had been interrupted by violence and amnesia, was finally within reach. Schedule meetings, Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. All of them. We're going to change everything. After he hung up, Elena and Adrian sat in silence for a moment, the weight of possibilities settling around them like a blessing. 10 years, Adrian said finally. 10 years of being the wrong person, building the wrong life. No, Elena corrected gently. 10 years of building exactly the right life for this moment. Adrian Torres had the heart to dream it. Adrian Kane has the power to make it real. Adrian reached up to cover her hand with his. And Elena Martinez has the courage to believe it's possible. Elena Kane now, she said, testing out the sound of her new name. Elena Kane has the courage to believe it's possible. That night, they made love for the first time since their reunion, and Grandma, it was like coming home to a place they'd never actually left. Every touch carried the memory of coffee shop afternoons and whispered promises. Every kiss was both familiar and miraculous, like finding something precious you thought was lost forever.
Afterward, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Elena traced the scar on Adrian's palm, the one from the construction accident all those years ago. I used to worry this would affect your surgical skills, she said softly. It won't matter for the work we're doing now, Adrian replied, kissing her forehead. But Elena, there's something else, something I haven't told you. She looked up at him, noting the nervous energy in his voice. What? The doctors think there might be treatments for my paralysis, experimental procedures, stem cell therapy. Nothing guaranteed, but... He paused, searching her face. Would it matter to you if I could walk again someday? Elena's heart swelled with love for this man who'd been through so much, who was still worried about being enough for her. Adrian, I fell in love with your mind, your heart, your dreams. I fell in love with how you see the world and how you want to change it. Whether you're walking or in a wheelchair, you're still the person I choose. You're still my Adrian. Torres or Kane? He asked with a smile. Both, Elena said, settling more comfortably against his chest. You're both, and I love every version of you. As sleep began to claim them, Elena thought about her father's letter. about choosing love fiercely and completely. She thought about coffee shops and second chances, about the mysterious ways that broken things could be made whole again. Tomorrow, they would start the real work, building the foundation that would provide prosthetics for children around the world, creating the medical clinics Adrian had always dreamed of, writing the love story they'd been meant to write all along. But tonight, they were simply Adrian and Elena, together again after 10 years of searching for each other across a world that had tried to keep them apart. 6 months later, Elena stood in the main hall of the Rodriguez Foundation, watching Adrian address a room full of doctors, engineers, and families whose children would benefit from their prosthetics program. He was in his element, passionate, articulate, completely transformed from the cold businessman she'd married for money into the healer he'd always been meant to be. The Torres-Kane Initiative, he was saying, having officially combined both his names for the foundation, will ensure that no child ever has to wait for the technology that could change their life simply because their family can't afford it. Elena smiled at the name. It had been her idea, honoring both the dreamer he'd been and the achiever he'd become. Their marriage had undergone a similar transformation, officially remarried in a small ceremony 6 weeks after the press conference, surrounded by friends who'd become family, and carrying flowers from her father's favorite garden. Mrs. Kane? Elena turned to find Dr. Patel, her father's oncologist, approaching with a warm smile. She'd invited him to today's event because Carlos always believed that healers should be celebrated. Doctor, I'm so glad you could come. I wouldn't have missed it. Your father would be so proud, you know. Not just of what you and Adrian are accomplishing, but of how you chose love over fear. Elena's eyes filled with the tears that still came easily when she thought about her father. He saw it before we did, somehow. Saw that Adrian was the same person I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Love has a way of recognizing itself. Even when the mind forgets, the heart remembers. As if drawn by their conversation, Adrian appeared at Elena's side, his wheelchair moving with the easy confidence he'd developed over the months of their real marriage. The formal distance was gone, replaced by the casual intimacy of two people who'd chosen each other completely. Dr. Patel, thank you for being here. Congratulations on everything you're building here. Carlos would have been amazed. Adrian's expression grew soft. I hope so. Elena's father was the one who helped me remember who I really was. In a lot of ways, this foundation exists because of the wisdom he shared in those final days. After Dr. Patel moved on to speak with other guests, Elena and Adrian found themselves alone for a moment in the crowded hall. Tired? Elena asked, noting the slight lines around Adrian's eyes. He'd been working intensely with physical therapists, and while the experimental treatments were showing promise, the process was exhausting. Good tired. The kind of tired that comes from doing work that matters, Adrian said, reaching for her hand. Elena squeezed his fingers, still amazed sometimes that she was allowed to touch him freely, to love him openly, to build a life with him that honored both their past and their future. I have something for you, she said, pulling a folded paper from her purse.
What's this? Remember how Papa told you I used to write poetry about coffee shops and strangers who might become everything? Adrian's eyes lit with interest as he unfolded the paper. The poem he mentioned. I found it when we were packing up his apartment. I thought you might want to read it. Elena watched Adrian's face as he read her younger self's words about a chance encounter that had changed her world. The poem was simple, maybe not very good, but it captured the exact moment when she'd realized that love was possible, when a stranger had helped her clean up spilled coffee and somehow spilled hope all over her carefully guarded heart. When Adrian looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Elena, this is beautiful, but more than that," he paused, folding the poem carefully. "Reading this, I can remember that afternoon, not just intellectually, but emotionally. I remember how you laughed when I made that terrible joke about coffee being like life, bitter until you add something sweet." Elena's breath caught. "You remember the joke?" "I remember thinking you were the sweetest thing I'd ever seen," Adrian said, his voice soft with wonder. "I remember wanting to spend every afternoon with you for the rest of my life." "And now you can," Elena said, leaning down to kiss him. "Now I can," he agreed against her lips. The evening continued with presentations about their work, testimonials from families, and updates on the medical research that was already changing lives. But for Elena, the most meaningful moment came near the end, when a little girl named Sophia approached Adrian's chair with a handmade card. "Mr. Adrian, this is for you." The card was construction paper and crayon, with a drawing of a man in a wheelchair, surrounded by children with various prosthetic limbs. At the top, in a child's careful script, it read, "Thank you for helping kids like me run and play." Adrian's composure finally cracked completely. Elena watched him struggle to speak through his tears, watched him carefully examine Sophia's drawing as if it were the most precious work of art in the world. "Sophia," he managed finally, "this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Will you put it in your office? I'm going to frame it and hang it right behind my desk so I can see it every day." As Sophia skipped back to her parents, Elena felt her own tears falling freely. This was why everything happened the way it did. The accident, the memory loss, the years of building Kane Industries into something powerful enough to change the world, all of it had led to this moment, to this little girl thanking the man she loved for giving her the gift of running. Later that night, as they prepared for bed in the penthouse that had finally become a home instead of just a place to sleep, Elena found Adrian sitting by the window, still holding Sophia's card. "Grandma," Elena said softly, speaking to the invisible listener who'd been present throughout their entire story, "I wish you could see him now. I wish you could see how the boy who wanted to heal the world finally found a way to do exactly that." Adrian looked up at her. "Who are you talking to?" Elena smiled, settling into the chair beside him. "My grandmother. She died when I was 16, but I still tell her things sometimes, important things. She would have loved you the same way Papa did." "Tell me about her." So Elena did. She told Adrian about her grandmother's garden, about her wisdom regarding love and sacrifice, about the way she used to say that broken things could be made more beautiful in the mending. As she talked, she realized that she was no longer speaking to an invisible listener,
Her grandmother's voice lived inside her now, part of the love and strength that had carried her through the darkest times. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Adrian said when Elena finished. "She was, and I think she would have told us that our story isn't really about getting back what we lost. It's about becoming who we needed to be to deserve the love we found." Adrian nodded, his thumb tracing the edge of Sophia's card. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you." "What's that?" "The experimental treatment? Dr. Williams thinks there's a 70% chance I'll regain some mobility in my legs. Maybe not full function, but enough to walk short distances." Elena's heart leapt, but she kept her voice steady. "How do you feel about that?" "Hopeful, but also aware that it doesn't change anything fundamental about who we are or what we're building together. Whether I walk or roll, we're still going to change the world." "Together," Elena confirmed. "Together."
As they prepared for sleep, Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a coffee shop encounter to a marriage of convenience to a love story that had touched thousands of lives. It had been messy, complicated, heartbreaking, and beautiful. "Adrian? Do you think we would have found each other again if Papa hadn't gotten sick? If I hadn't needed the money?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I think love finds a way," he said finally. "Maybe not the same way, but somehow. We were always meant to be together, Elena. The universe just had to break us both a little bit first, so we'd know how precious this is." Elena curled against his side, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside the window, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, full of millions of stories, millions of people searching for connection and meaning and love. But inside their room, there was perfect peace. Two people who'd found their way back to each other, who'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that almost don't happen at all. "Grandma," Elena whispered into the darkness, "thank you for teaching me that love is always worth fighting for, even when it seems impossible, especially then." And somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, Elena could swear she heard her grandmother's voice, warm with approval. "Choose love, mija. Always choose love." As Elena drifted off to sleep beside the man she'd loved through memory loss, scandal, loss, and redemption, she smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to heal the world, new chances to prove that love could overcome anything. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of her first love, her only love, her forever love. The boy from the coffee shop had become the man of her dreams, and their story was just beginning. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever had to choose between safety and love, between playing it small and fighting for what matters most, share your story in the comments below. Because Grandma always said that the best stories are the ones we tell each other, the ones that remind us we're not alone in this beautiful, complicated journey called love.